Videos like these are made possible by viewers like you, who support the channel through Patreon, channel memberships, and stream donations. And don't forget to check out the Bad Weapon Rehabilitation servers at www.badweaponrehab.tf. Check the links in the description for more information, and let's get into the video. Jurassic World Evolution 3 has finally been announced after what feels like an eternity of waiting. It's kind of weird how long this game has stayed in a sort of announcement limbo. Like, we all knew it was coming, but Frontier just kept us in the dark up until now. Well, I think it's clear to see why that's the case, because wow, they've been very busy. This game seems like such a massive step forward from the previous two games, and pretty much exactly the ways I've been hoping for years now. But unfortunately, that does come with taking a step backwards, which we'll talk about later on in this video. But let's get excited and talk about the good stuff, because it's almost everything. The thing I'm absolutely the most excited for is the new terrain tools. Oh my god, I'm so happy just looking at this. The JW series has been plagued by frankly awful terrain tools since day one, and it's been the thing that I've wanted overhauled the most the whole time I've been playing these games, and now it's finally been done. This looks very close to the kind of terrain editing we've seen before in Frontier's Planet series, but with a few interesting changes. The first shot we see of the terrain editing in the trailer shows the player creating a deep valley, and this process auto-generates rocks at the harshest angles. I think this isn't just an aesthetic choice, but also a game design choice to create a physical barrier. One of the things that's always concerned me about getting better terrain tools is how dinosaurs will handle sharp inclines and declines. If you mod the current games to allow this, then it doesn't exactly look the best. Even the inclines you can make without mods make the dinosaurs look a bit off. But this seems to be a really smart way to limit the kinds of areas that dinosaurs can move around in by blocking their movement with rocks, while also giving players the means to edit terrain however they want. And if they want more sheer cliff faces without these automatically generated rocks, then they have the placeable rocks that can be scaled to just the right size for their particular needs, and forms into any kind of structure they want, like this badass rock arch in the background here. You can even use these rock structures to keep your dinosaurs contained in more naturalistic looking enclosures like you might see at an actual zoo. This was also something that concerned me originally, since the player base has already figured out how to keep dinosaurs permanently contained with planters, so this might have an effect on game balance as dinosaur breakouts are a core aspect of this franchise. But considering you will still need to place down fences to allow staff inside the dinosaur habitats, I think this works out in the game's favor in both campaign and sandbox parks. Also, speaking of breakouts, there's even a returning feature from JPOG in the form of security cameras, which in JPOG only serve to boost your park security rating, but in this game will actually automate your ranger teams to repair the fences and capture the dinosaurs if a dinosaur breakout is detected in their line of sight, which is very greatly appreciated. And it's awesome to see a mechanic that used to exist in JPOG get expanded upon and improved. And there's so much more. The foliage brush seems to have gotten a massive improvement that makes decorating guest areas full of structures seem like much less of a hassle compared to how it currently works in JW 2. They added an undo and a redo button that can only be used for decorations and can't cheese the challenge of the game, and they actually added Zoo Tycoon 2 style waterfalls. Oh my god, you cannot even imagine how happy I was when I saw you could do this. And it looks like you'll be able to use everything available to you on all maps, making theming your theme park so much easier, and making maps that take place in biomes like deserts feel so much more vibrant and versatile. All of this is such a breath of fresh air compared to what we've had for years now, and I'll be so happy to see that goddamn terrain notification rot in the cold ground forever. You could definitely say that this is how the terrain should have worked since the beginning, and I'll completely agree with you there. But I think the reason it hasn't is because the original two games were also available on previous generation consoles that probably just didn't have the juice to handle this sort of thing. Planet Zoo and Planet Coaster were only made available on consoles recently, and they're only on the newest generation, likely for the same reason. JW3 has similarly left those old consoles behind, which I think is the main factor that lets us use these new terrain tools, and while it does suck for the people who play these games and don't have the newest hardware, for the game itself, this is purely a positive thing. The limitations of the previous console generations were already making themselves well known in JW 2, with a list of limitations for those consoles so massive, it makes the 3 dig site limit of PS2 JPOG blush. It's about damn time as far as I'm concerned, and hopefully only needing to develop for PC and the newest generation of consoles streamlines the development process a lot more going forward. I think the older consoles were also a limiting factor in another highly requested feature, and that's modular building, another new addition to JW3. This is something I'm mostly positive on, but also kind of paralyzed by. I've never really thought that full-on Planet Series style modular building was something that the JW series needed, and honestly, I wonder how this will impact things like building destruction during storms. Can there even be visual indications of building damage with such a modular system outside of the little notification? I don't know. Anyway, while I really like modular building in concept, I'm not exactly the best at it, and the learning curve on it is something I'm probably going to have to learn during another Mega Park stream build series. It's a daunting system to learn, but there's a few positive factors for those of us like me who don't want to spend an hour plus building each structure from scratch. For one thing, it doesn't seem like decorating buildings for the sake of keeping your guests happy is a necessity like it is in Planet Zoo, which was always something that made getting into that game a bit of a headache for me. And for another thing, not only is Frontier including their own prefabricated structures in the game in several different styles for you to choose from, but you'll also have access to the Frontier Workshop to download other people's uploaded content for your own parks. In fact, you can access the workshop from within the game itself. That's insanely helpful. I can absolutely see myself obsessively checking the workshop day in and day out for just the right structure to fit a build I'm working on. So as far as I'm concerned, this is all fantastic. And the new campaign taking place worldwide over a multitude of different highly varied continents makes this process even better, since now there's tons of decorations based on the locations these parks take place in. The campaign is also apparently non-linear, letting you go back and forth between the different park locations in no set order, and seems to have a rival faction that seeks to sabotage your operations. I find this to be a much better idea than your own factions or scientists sabotaging your park. This is much more organic and will be sure to make me resent my scientists a lot less since they're coming back as well. The locations the campaign takes place in are Japan, Hawaii, Malta, Italy, China, Indonesia, the Azores, Montana, Nevada, and Hawaii. It's good to see that even the tie-in games realized that Rebirth's concept of extirpating all the world's dinosaurs to exclusively tropical climates was fucking stupid. Though I am curious to see if older locations will be returning like the Five Deaths, the Movie Islands, or the challenge mode and campaign locations from JW 2. They mentioned some returning locations, but I'm not entirely sure in what capacity. I doubt it's just the maps copy and pasted since the terrain generation is so wildly different now that the old maps probably won't cut it anymore. One of the deluxe edition bonuses is unique buildings for Clark County, Nevada, which is the county in Nevada where Las Vegas is located, so we could very easily be getting Jurassic World Las Vegas. So now guests can gamble with their money and their lives. This is all great because not only does the campaign seem like a massive step up from the glorified tutorial that is the second game's campaign, but I've always wanted to have areas themed around the location that my dinosaurs are found in. But I've never been able to do that effectively outside of recreating a basic biome until now. I do wish there was something to work with for Africa though, especially something like an Egypt or maybe Kenyan or Tanzanian themed area, especially with how common African style decorations are in actual zoos due to the abundance of African animals, but oh well. I can definitely see that coming in a potential Chaos Theory DLC, since I know that part of that series does take place in Africa. I'm just saying I'd really love to be able to properly decorate a Spinosaurus area with some African buildings, especially now that we're getting yet another highly requested feature, swimming dinosaurs and deep water. We haven't seen the full depth of this mechanic yet, but in the first trailer, we see Brachiosaurus wading in deep water, and in the second trailer, we see Spinosaurus swimming in it. I don't know if all dinosaurs will be able to swim. JW2 restricted small dinosaurs from entering the water, but that was because they looked ridiculous walking around in water they would otherwise drown in, and they probably didn't want to add swimming behaviors just for these small animals when people want them for, you know, the big important ones. Ideally, we'd get swimming for all dinosaurs, but I could understand if that's not the case, and only certain dinosaurs are able to swim. That would give us more options for keeping our dinosaurs contained, since we could also use moats for non-swimming species, which would be pretty cool, and something else that real zoos do as well. I also hope that certain species have deep water as a requirement for their habitat satisfaction, and that this mechanic means we'll be seeing some semi-aquatic prehistoric species coming to our parks. I'd love to see some super cracks in mine.
Also called the emperor crocodile or super crack. The Sarcus circus is
Okay, there's no excuse for that one. There's no excuse for super crack. That's what Ronald Reagan was handing out. That's not the only highly requested feature coming though. Frontier has absolutely spoiled us. For one thing, pterosaurs will now walk, which to be honest should have been in JW2 from the start, but it's nice to see that it's finally been implemented and we don't have to worry about begging Frontier for it for another game's life cycle. It's one of the biggest things that's kept the pterosaurs from feeling the most natural, and it's very refreshing to see this get addressed. And then there's the attraction side of things. Not only is there a petting zoo where guests can actually go and pet dinosaurs just like in the Jurassic World movie, but a text blurb on the website has confirmed that the motherfucking J-Pog Balloon Tour is coming to the game. That's how nuts this game's launch is, that they can just tuck away what is easily one of the most requested attractions the game's ever had off to the side like that because they just have so much more to show us. A selfish part of me is still hoping for a Sky Tower attraction and maybe gondolas down the line, but with everything we've gotten, our park's skylines are going to look amazing. They do also hint at an attraction going into the water, which to me hints at maybe the highly requested River Cruise tour, but we'll see. This could just be referring to the lagoons and their own attractions, so I'm holding my excitement on that. Lagoons and aviaries do seem to be largely the same, just with the ability to decorate them being much easier, which is a bonus as far as I'm concerned. I like what I'm seeing in the background here with using the cliff rocks to make a more naturalistic background for this lagoon. It's very aesthetically pleasing. Like, remember how stoked we were just to get kelp in the last game? Now we get to do whatever the hell we want to our lagoons, and I'm very satisfied with that. I do still hope there's more to see in regards to lagoon animal behaviors, but outside of breeding, I'm not sure what else we'll see from them. Fingers crossed for more surface interaction behavior. And this does bring me to what's arguably the biggest selling point of the game. Dinosaur breeding and baby dinosaurs. Now to be perfectly honest, this wasn't a feature that really grabbed me as much as it seemed to inspire a lot of other people when it was first being conceptualized by the fan base before the game's reveal. I recognize the benefits of dinosaur breeding. Trust me, I've gone through the dinosaur old age death spiral more times than I can count, and some babies to bolster my populations would have gone a long way, but I was never quite sold on it. However, Frontier has done a pretty good job at making this a fully fledged feature of the game, and not just a gimmick or a marketing tool because, oh, look at the cute babies. Dinosaurs will be able to be either male or female, and you can decide the sex of the species at birth. Species will also have varying degrees of sexual dimorphism, basically meaning that each species will have the males and females look different from one another in some capacity. For a lot of species, this literally only seems to be skin deep, in that the males will have access to more vibrant skin patterns than the females. I've looked over these male and female Tyrannosaurus models for a while now, and I'm not noticing too much different outside of the male skin pattern being a lot more bold. I think this is totally fine since, for one thing, you really don't want to mess with a lot of the more iconic movie designs, and it saves a bit of time and effort making it so that you don't have to remodel every single species with a dramatically different male and female design. Even in modern day Archosaurs, this is fairly realistic. Plenty of birds and crocodilians look almost identical between the sexes. But some species do have noticeably different sexes, such as the Triceratops whose male boasts a larger frill and longer horns on top of the different skin pattern. One of the deluxe edition's new species, Guanlong, seems to be a spectacular poster child for this feature, with the male sporting a brilliantly colored crest and brightly colored plumage on his neck, while the female skin is much more reserved, and the baby skin is also reminiscent of a young deer, and even has bright blue eyes that it seems to lose as it ages like some real baby animals do, kinda like cats. Dinosaurs will only breed with a male and female present, and only if the exact correct conditions are met to facilitate breeding. And this, I think, is where the mechanic gets really interesting. For example, in order to breed, Triceratops need to be kept entirely by itself. No other species present, otherwise it won't breed. And every species needs to have their habitat suitability at 100% in order to breed. I think this is fantastic, creating a sort of give and take for each species in conformity to their breeding requirements, since having a Triceratops in a large herbivore enclosure would be quite useful, but it would prevent them from breeding, which forces you to make a real choice or have Triceratops in multiple different enclosures throughout your park. And this whole process reminds me a lot of breeding conditions at actual zoos. Breeding white rhinos was a headache for zoos for decades. No one could get a grasp on it until eventually it was figured out that female white rhinos like to be in the presence of a group of other females in order to be receptive to mating. You know, girls always like to go to the bathroom in big groups together? That, but it's rhino sex. I imagine that some species will be very simple to breed, while others will require much more specific conditions. There's also a tab for the dinosaur's family tree so you can see exactly who the parents and relatives of each dinosaur are, which makes me think there might also be mechanics related to inbreeding, and more specifically, avoiding it.
I brought you more males! Why would you choose your brother?
This is something that Planet Zoo also does, and I think it works perfectly with the JW series mechanic of negative traits and lifespans. Inbred dinosaurs might be guaranteed to be sickly and short-lived, or may have lower base ratings, or maybe inbreeding will result in smaller nest sizes along with those other features. So you still have to manage your populations and prevent this from occurring by adding fresh blood into the mix every now and again. If you've ever kept guppies before, you should be aware of these struggles. Of course, that's just me speculating. Nothing about an inbreeding system has been mentioned, but I think that's because it's not exactly the most marketable feature of your game. Usually. Now, the game advertises that of the 82 species in the game at launch, 75 of them will be able to breed, meaning there's 7 species that can't. People have speculated on whether or not this could be the hybrids, the tiny species, or maybe a mix of both, with their own justifications. One justification is that hybrids can't breed in real life, which is kind of true, but also not really. While it is true that certain hybrids like mules and ligers are infertile, hybrids of wildly different species can absolutely still be fertile, like the false killer whale and bottlenose dolphin hybrid called the wholphin, and in some cases can even form their own species in a process called hybrid speciation, as can be seen in the climbing dolphin. Not to mention, preventing hybrids from breeding would make us miss out on the very marketable Spinoceratops babies from Camp Cretaceous, even if I think the last 2 seasons are as dumb as everyone else does. Fucking invincible robot dog bullshit. And the justification for the tiny species is that, hey, they're already so small that they're getting lost in regular grass. Their babies would be downright microscopic. The Indominus Rex has been confirmed to be a species in the game, meaning it may be one of the species unable to breed, and it's likely that the Indoraptor will make it in too. But either answer isn't really satisfying because it fails to answer a very important question. Which ones aren't making the cut? Okay, so Jurassic World Evolution 2 ended its support cycle with 122 species, and this game is launching with 86 if you count the deluxe edition ones, but that's counting the 2 new species of Protoceratops and Guanlong. So at maximum, there would be 84 returning species, but we know they're adding more new species to this game's launch. How many new species? We don't know. JV2 launched with 15 new species, but most of those were in the aviaries and lagoons, which were brand new features at the time. Not to mention the actual pool of unique new dinosaurs to choose from for this series is only getting smaller. Even Guanlong is overlapping with Proceratosaurus, and only stands out so much because this one's actually feathered. So I think a new species count of around 7 to 10 is most reasonable. But the main thing to take away from this is that anywhere from 40 to 50 members of JW2's roster are going to be gutted from JW3's launch. Now, with the addition of baby dinosaurs, this is something that I and many others absolutely saw coming, and a big part of why I was so apprehensive about the mechanic being added. Because adding baby dinosaurs isn't as simple as just shrinking down an adult model. The entire model has to be different. Imagine if baby humans were just shrunk down adults. Close your eyes. Imagine it. Yeah, I don't like it either. You're welcome for that mental image though. Editing an existing model to be a male as opposed to a female, or vice versa as seems to be the case with Geosternbergia, is comparatively simple. Only skins or certain parts of the model need to be changed. But that's not the case for a baby, and it shows in how wildly different the models are. I think part of this has to do with the fact that the modeling style of later JW2 is pretty radically different from the first game and the launch of JW2, and these baby models seem to be following that newer design trend, which I'm all for since I think that the later JW2 models are some of the absolute best we've ever seen, and that absolutely carried over into the Guanlong and Protoceratops designs. I know an actual paleo artist did a lot of work on the JW2 DLCs, and I wish I could find her Twitter again because these models seem like a product of her work, and she's done a fantastic job on basically everything we've seen. Anyway, back to the hybrids and the little guys. The reason this explanation of which species will be unable to breed is unsatisfying is twofold. Number one, the number of tiny species and hybrids in the game is identical. Exactly 7 of each, unless you count Sigisaurus as being tiny, in which case there's 8 tiny guys. I think he's just big enough to have babies if you ask me. So if it's a mix of both hybrids and tinies who can't breed, then that means there will still be cuts across the board for both groups. And 2, suppose all 7 non-breeding slots are all of the game's hybrids or all of the game's tiny dudes. That still means a significant portion of the roster we have at launch will consist of either hybrids or tiny species. And both of those groups are fairly contentious within the fan base to be making up over 8% of your species roster. And if no tiny species or hybrids are going to be able to breed, then I'm just confused as to why they're not all being added if the excuse of needing to work on extra models for each species doesn't apply to them. No extra work needs to be done outside of potentially making them sexually dimorphic, which could be easily done by using the same skin technique as we see on the T-Rex. No matter how you slice it, 40 to 50 species being cut is a massive number. My S tier of the second game consisted of 40 species. I'm absolutely going to lose some of my favorites, and plenty of other people's favorites are listed way lower on my list. I've seen people begging for poor little Chasmosaurus to stay, and don't even get me started on Utahraptor and Utyrannus. My personal biggest concern is not that I'll never see any of these species again, but rather that Frontier is going to charge us for them in the form of DLC. I cannot stress this enough. I find the idea of paying for species we already had in the last game to be frankly unacceptable. This is a lesson that Frontier should have learned with the hybrid species pack in the previous game, a pack that received mixed reception. Some people have said that since this game is a sequel, not an expansion or an update, that means it's okay to sell the cut dinosaurs as DLC, and I frankly think that's a load of bullshit. This isn't like a transition from Doom Eternal to Doom the Dark Ages. It's not the same game, but they gave it a new campaign and cut out the Super Shotgun meat hook. They're wildly different experiences, despite both being first-person shooters in the same franchise. The JW series has always taken this sort of iterative approach to their games, trying to be as much of a pure upgrade as possible to the last one, a replacement for the previous game rather than a lateral experience. Be honest with yourself. Do you consider JW2 to be a different experience that's just as good as JW1? Or do you consider it a straight upgrade with basically no reason to go back to the original? If you play JW2 regularly, can you say the same thing about JW1? Of course not! JW1 is missing out on mountains of features and functionality that JW2 offers, and the biggest thing that JW1 has over its sequel is that its campaign is actually fleshed out, and there's a couple of skin patterns that didn't make the cut to the sequel because the skin system changed, largely for the better, though some skins and patterns are absolutely missed. Rest in peace, Coastal Styracosaurus. All I'm saying is that it's way more accurate to treat these games as iterative versions of the same game rather than a totally different experience. Frontier added everything that was in the previous game to the second game at launch, outside of a handful of hybrids, and they deservedly got some major flack for that when they sold them back to us. I don't want to undermine the work that Frontier has put into making this game look so incredible, but I also don't want to undermine the fact that I've already bought a worse version of the same game twice now, and if I didn't have to pay for the old species then, why should I start now? Here's the bottom line. I think that the best course of action for Frontier is to add the cut species over the course of the game's lifespan in the game's free updates. That's similar to the approach they're taking with Planet Coaster 2, which is very fairly a game that people have criticized to hell and back for the same thing, cutting out content from the previous game and trying to sell it back to the player base. In fact, I think the response to Planet Coaster 2's very rushed and scuffed launch is why we're getting the game in October instead of alongside Jurassic World Rebirth like we got for the first game in Fallen Kingdom. Frontier delayed the game as much as they could while still staying in the fiscal year that they promised their stockholders so they could make the game as polished as they could on launch. And even then, that resulted in such a massive amount of species being cut. I think if Frontier had another year or two to work on this game, they absolutely would add all the previously available species for free in the base game. But they didn't. They planned to get the game out in time for Rebirth, which I guess is the fault of that movie for getting made so damn fast in the first place. And they had to get the game out in this fiscal year. And I see the post-launch support and updates as the ideal means of getting these species back in the game. It's basically the same thing as having more time to develop the game, except now it's mostly just species as opposed to core features, which I think is actually a lot better, assuming the game is actually as polished and feature heavy on launch as I'm hoping it is. I do not want to see the returning species bundled into DLC that I have to pay for. I will give Thanatos Dracon and Concavenator a pass, because again, it's clear that Frontier is being rushed into this release date, and I'm sure if they had more time, they'd have a full deluxe roster of new species, considering the criticism they received for not only Hyangosaurus being a deluxe edition species, but also the hybrid pack. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt in this one instance, especially since the deluxe edition content is absolutely going to be worth it for the new building set and new species in the first place, with Guanlong being gorgeous and Protoceratops being one of my most wanted species for years now. There is an exception I'm willing to grant them though. I will accept cut species being re-added through DLC if they have been given a significant visual update in the same vein as Ankylodocus, since if it's that dramatic of an overhaul, that basically counts as being a new species. There's so many species I would love to see this for, and I'd be downright ecstatic to see Archaeornithomimus show up in a DLC pack if it was fully feathered and remodeled. Assuming the game gets 10 major updates like JW2 did, and assuming 40 to 50 species end up getting cut, that means each major update could contain 4 to 5 species each, allowing us to completely catch up by the end of the game's support cycle. And maybe you can skew the numbers a bit to throw in a redesigned species into a DLC pack every now and again. Here are my picks for 6 I'd be happy with buying redesigned, and if you don't understand why, then just watch my tier list video. Just know that if Nyctosaurus gets added, then Barbarodactylus can stay how it is. God knows that the modders will add in all the cut species on day 1 anyway, but the console players matter too, damn it. Frontier has shown that they're very good at listening. This game is proof enough of that, and I really hope they listen to this. If cut content being resold is bad in Planet Coaster 2, it's bad here. If the hybrids being resold is bad in JW 2, it's bad here. I don't want them to listen to the people on Reddit who are totally fine with this sort of thing because they'll pay for anything. As consumers who have been through this cycle before, we deserve better. Now granted, we haven't heard Frontier say anything about if or how cut species will be re-implemented, but I wanted to get this out now because I think this is important, and I think if enough noise is made about this, then Frontier will basically have to listen to us. I don't enjoy the process of browbeating a developer who makes games that I like to do my bidding, but I also don't enjoy paying for something I already paid for. Again. And I have to drive this point home because this genuinely seems like the only thing wrong with the game. Everything else looks exactly like everything I've been asking for years now, ever since my first review of the first game. And this is a problem that's ripe for exploitation. So as long as the only issue with the game that I can see will be fixed in a reasonable manner, I'll be happy to support it. But so help me God, if I see another unedited Hyangosaurus for sale in a DLC, I will never shut the fuck up about it no matter how many challenge runs I make of these games.